No, I've been actually sent a picture of that to one of our kids. I told him I've got his outfit, so don't worry about it. So Carter's going to have his dress blues on, so he's going to look sharp. I think he'll look sharp Sunday night. So it's going to be a lot of fun. We got a lot of people in this space, and right after the 10 o'clock service, we've got to transform this from chairs everywhere to make this a dinner and make this the Titanic. So we will do what we can to do that. Please remember, we have, just went blank. Who's in the hospital? Kevin Peoples. Has he come? He's home. He's come home. He had his thyroid removed on Monday. And then Pat Graham is still in the hospital with pneumonia. Jack is home. And then Julie Moore had surgery, and she did really well. And I've talked to her. Is she home yet, Julie? I do not know for sure. She was still in the hospital when I talked to her, but she was planning to come home. Lucy Rowland had surgery yesterday on her hand. Remember I told y'all in the service that she had a skateboard accident, and she messed up her hand. And then, who is it that's... We've got a knee replacement. It's coming. It's not going to be as bad as mine, but it will. Let's see. Who's that? Deborah. Yes. I've got. Hold on. It will be bad, but not as bad as mine was. Yeah, Debbie Kulskar, Kulscar. They come to 10 o'clock. She's having knee replacement on Friday. I'm going to call them tonight. All right. And yes. Okay. Goodness gracious. So Louise is in a boot and had oral surgery yesterday. We sure remember her. Let's remember Clive too. Let's pray for him as well. We will certainly do that. Huh? Brenda Isley has had her 4th or 5th treatment, her chemotherapy, so please remember her. And Stuart Hable had surgery. He had surgery. He was sore when I talked to him, but he had surgery last week. So he's recovering well. All right. Well, let's have our blessing, and then we'll start our program. Gracious God, we thank you just for the privilege to know you and to love you, and you love us so dearly. And we ask your blessings upon all these that are hurting in the midst of our church family, but also in the midst of our community. There are a lot of unspoken requests and unspoken needs all around us. And so we pray, as always, thy will be done, but we also pray for healing and just mercy and hope. And so, Lord, thank you that we can gather. Thank you for people like Gabby that care and that make a difference in lives. And, Lord, thank you for the opportunity to get to learn a little bit about what she's doing. And so, Lord, we just thank you for this food and for those that prepared it. In Christ's holy, wonderful, and mighty name we pray. Amen. So let's welcome Gabby home. All right.
Hello. All right, and I do have a PowerPoint that is not this photo, thank goodness. Okay. Well, good evening. So I think a lot of you know me, but in case you don't, my name is Gabby Garringer. I grew up in this church, so this is not my first Wednesday night supper. It is my first one not singing in a children's talent show, so this is a very different experience for me. But Alan asked me to come and speak to y'all for a little while on what I'm doing post-graduation. I am working with a nonprofit in Columbia, South Carolina that I feel fairly confident none of you have ever heard of, called Lutheran Services Carolinas. And we work with the refugee community in refugee resettlement. And I feel fairly certain when I say refugees, there's at least one person who kind of tensed up, because that is a very politicized topic. There's a lot of misinformation and kind of confusion about what that means, what that looks like, what resettlement is, what's happening here in the United States. So I just want to kind of give you guys some more information on, what it means to be a refugee, what that resettlement looks like, and what it looks like here in the U.S. So I've got a lot of ground to cover, and we'll go ahead and dive right in. So since this is, like I said, a very politicized topic, I want to go ahead and start by addressing the legal status of my clients. There are a couple terms that I want you to know going forward with the presentation. So the first is immigrant, which is just a catch-all category for any person living permanently in a country that is not where they were born. So immigrants can be legal or illegal. I'm not getting into illegal immigration tonight because that is another topic entirely. And all of my clients come through legally in some form or another. So these other four categories are all within that immigrant category. So we have asylees, which are people who are already living in the U.S. and have applied to stay here permanently based on fear of persecution in their home country. Then you have special immigrant visa, which you apply for overseas. And that is granted to people who aided the U.S. government abroad. Most often, that's our military allies. We have temporary protected status, which is similar to asylee. It's different in that it's only temporary rather than permanent status. So that's being seen a lot with Ukraine right now, in that it's too dangerous for them to return. So even if they have an expired visa, they're allowed to stay here for a little while longer. And then we have refugees, which is what I really want to focus on tonight because that is going to be at least the vast majority of my clients, and it's also one of the most complicated routes to citizenship here in the U.S. All right, so I want to address kind of what is a refugee right off the bat. So a refugee is a person who has fled their home country due to fear of persecution. So to qualify for refugee status, you have to meet this persecution standard, which is plausible fear of harm based on one or more of 5 factors. Those 5 factors include race, religion, nationality, political affiliation, and membership in a social group. Notice that poverty is not listed in those categories, so you can't be impoverished, looking for a better life for you and your family, and qualify for refugee status. These are people who are actively fearing, more often than not, threats to their lives. There are people that are coming after them trying to kill them, and they're escaping that. So refugees flee to usually one of the bordering nations that is accepting them, and they apply for this official refugee status. So I want to go over a few kind of jarring statistics. The first is that there are 26.4 million refugees worldwide. So that is 26.4 million people that are actively fleeing threat of violence or threats of death to their lives and those of their families. So that is a lot of people, and that also does not include the tens of millions more who are internally displaced, meaning that they have fled their home city or their hometown, but they have not left to another country yet. So that puts us at about 70 million if you include those. So I am going to ask for a little bit of audience participation here. So they go to these camps and they apply for refugee status, and ultimately the goal is to be resettled and start their lives in a new country. So does anyone have a guess how long it takes after registering for refugee status, how many years it takes to start, not finish, but start the resettlement process? I got 2, I got 5. I'd go up if I were you. 7, 10, getting closer. 17 is the average. 17 that they're waiting in these camps, living basically in tent cities. So, another statistic, how many do we think, what percentage of this 26.4 million will ever actually be resettled to another country? Any guesses? 10%, I'd go way down. 5, 1%, 1/100% will be resettled. So that means that 99.99% of this 26.4 million is going to spend the rest of their lives in those refugee camps, living in tents, receiving food once a day in rations, with limited education and limited health care. So that's kind of dismal. Let's move on to the 0.01% that do make it through to resettlement, because that's who I get to work with. So the very lucky few. So that process, it's very long and very complex. The first thing they do is register with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, or UNHCR. And once they've registered, they wait for, again, that average period of about 17 years. And eventually, UNHCR draws some names out of a hat. It's a lottery as to who gets to be resettled. So they go through that lottery process, and they do an initial interview and background check, and then they're referred out to any one of the dozens of countries around the world that are currently accepting refugees, United States included. Keep in mind, these people have no choice of where they are referred to. Some end up in the United Kingdom, some end up in Germany, some end up here. They have no choice. So they're referred, if it's to the U.S., to our Resettlement Support Centers Abroad, or RSCs. And these RSCs, their role is to screen them to see if they fit in our processing priorities, which those are set by the president and the executive branch. And it's very political how that works. Basically, we kind of pick and choose who we want to come and who we want to prioritize. So, for example, a few years ago, there was a ban on Syrian refugees, so they would not have made it past this step, whereas we may have said, okay, this country, we want them to come here, we're going to prioritize them, and their applications will move faster. If they make it through that step, then they're referred to the Department of Homeland Security and the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. And at this step, they have to do a very, very intense interview process where they separate each family member individually. This includes children down to 6, 7 years old. And they do an intensive interview over their experiences. And really, it's designed to catch them in a lie and make sure that they have earned this refugee status. And again, intensive background checks. So they make it through that interview process. And if they pass, then they're granted conditional approval pending another background check and a medical exam. So these 3 steps, if they make it through, these are one of the most highly vetted populations in the entire world. All right, so they make it through these 3 steps. I feel like it's also important to note at this point that people are considered as cases. So you have one person considered the primary applicant who applies on behalf of the family. The only people who can be considered a part of their case are their spouse and children unmarried under the age of 21. So if you are a mother who has 2 children over the age of 21 and 2 under the age of 21, the 2 older children have to make it through this process, get randomly selected through the lottery, and make it through the other 2 steps on their own. So family separation at this point is very, very common. All right, so they make it through these 3 steps. Then they move to the assurance, which is where USCIS reaches out to one of the resettlement agencies in the U.S., sees who has capacity, and if they're accepted, then they're good to go. They get them connected to the International Organization for Migration for travel. They arrange their plane tickets, and they give them a travel loan for their ticket. Notice I said loan. They do have to start paying that back 6 months after they arrive, so nothing quite more American than arriving here $10,000 in debt, right? So they do have to pay those back. It's a lot of money. So they book their travel, and then they arrive in the United States, and I will get more to that in a minute because that's where we take over. And then a year later, they can apply for their green card, and 5 years later, they can apply for citizenship. So by the end, this process, from the time they arrived at camp until they're a citizen of a new country, is on average about 24 years. So our clients are also some of the most patient people in the world. That's longer than I've been alive, that most of them have been waiting for citizenship. So now that I've explained the resettlement process, let's completely throw it out the window as we're talking about 2 cases that I'm sure you guys have seen in the news over the past few months. The first is what's happening in Afghanistan. I don't have time to kind of cover what happened exactly, just the United States involvement. So basically, the capital fell into Taliban hands, and the rest of the country followed. The United States was very eager to get our military allies out of there, and so we chartered military planes to go and evacuate. And so this was a very chaotic process. It happened in the span of about a week. And at the airport, you had United States controlling some doors, Taliban controlling others. There was bribery and extortion. And bottom line is, the people who got on the planes were the ones who happened to be in the right place at the right time and know the right people. And everyone else got left behind, including immediate family members of many of my clients. Their parents, their siblings, their spouses, and some of them, their children, are still in Afghanistan. So, what's their status here? That's where it gets really interesting, because they did not go through this typical long refugee process. And so they're here illegally. The United States government said you can come and seek safety here, but we have not given them status. And so they have a couple options moving forward. The first, if they were connected to the U.S. military, they have the option to pursue an SIV case, which is not a bad option. It's just slow right now because it's really backlogged. The other option is to pursue asylum, which is not a great option because a very high percentage of asylum cases are ultimately denied, which means my clients would be facing deportation back to Afghanistan. So I have not had to see that yet. I hope I don't have to. The other option is hope and pray that Congress passes the Afghan Adjustment Act, which would give them legal status, but we're just kind of waiting. That's honestly kind of been put on the back burner with all the Ukraine stuff, unfortunately. So the last question on here, why am I working 80+ hours a week? I hope you recognize that as a joke, but it has been a lot, and the reason that I say that is because we have been really overwhelmed with this crisis, mainly because over the past couple of years, between the Trump administration and COVID-19, refugee resettlement was practically non-existent. Between October 2020 and October 2021, my agency resettled about 50 people total. This year, in a span of 3 months, we resettled 200 Afghans. So we were understaffed. We did not have enough resources, enough funding, enough anything, and we didn't have the policies in place because they were coming through a brand new program, the Afghan Placement and Assistance Program, that we had never dealt with before and was constantly changing and shifting. And so trying to keep up. Basically, we were drowning. I'm pretty sure that's why I was hired in January, and I will take it. We did resettle our last Afghan through this program in February, so we are finally starting to catch our breath. We're breathing a little bit. It's hitting my program now, but that's okay. We're doing great. So now I want to move on to, I'm sure you've seen about Ukraine, and again, I don't have time to get into what's actually happening over there. But as far as what the United States is doing, I actually had a slide ready on this last week and then had to completely revamp it because we got new news over the weekend. So President Biden has announced that we will be accepting up to 100,000 Ukrainians, and he also announced his Unite for Ukraine campaign, which sounds great in theory, but in reality is not that beneficial because, first of all, we'll never see that 100,000. There's no way, because our refugee cap right now is 125, and so far this fiscal year, we've only resettled 9. So that number is just a number until the policies and systems are put in place to actually make that happen for them to come here. The other thing is that we're making some of the same mistakes that we did with the Afghans, in that we are not giving them legal status. And as I've already mentioned, that's really problematic, especially with them trying to bring their families over. And then we've also had issues with President Biden's plan has them coming through sponsorship, which means it's really cool. The average U.S. citizen can sponsor a Ukrainian family to come over and start their new lives here. But it's a lot more complicated than most people think, and that means that they're not eligible for the services that they could receive from an organization like us, or the financial assistance. So really, we're kind of setting them up for failure at this point. The programs look really good. They've gained a lot of public favor, but they're not actually helping people in the long run. So we have a lot of work to do if we actually want to welcome Ukrainians. So another thing that I want to mention about Ukraine is I have loved seeing all the support for the Ukrainians. You know, I've seen lots of flags flying. The digital banners are flashing the yellow and blue, and that's fantastic. But my question is, where was that support for the Syrians a few years ago? Or for the Congolese or the Burmese now? And really, just why Ukraine? Why this focus on Ukraine? And the reason seems to be that they're being invaded by a country that historically we do not like. And so the president and his administration recognize this. They've really pushed it. They've emphasized it. They've given it a lot of media attention. And it's garnered a lot of support. But in the process, we're neglecting a lot of the rest of the world. We've turned what should be a humanitarian issue into a political one. We have a habit of doing that. So that is all I have on Ukraine and Afghanistan right now, because I want to get into what I actually do. So like I mentioned, I work for Lutheran Services Carolinas. This is a very brief overview of our organizational structure. We technically report all the way up to the president because we are under the Department of Health and Human Services, which is one of the cabinet positions that advises the president. Under that, we are a part of the Administration for Children and Families and the Office of Refugee Resettlement. ORR is a scary acronym for me because that's who does our audits. And so we work a lot with them. They are the government agency that contracts out with 9 nonprofits, 9 501c3 organizations that are authorized for resettlement. So not just any nonprofit can do this. It has to go through ORR. Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service is one of those 9. That's who we're affiliated with. And then we're obviously Lutheran Services Carolina. So LIRS sets the policies, and then we execute on the ground. So what does that look like? Well, if you want to know what we do, first of all, you kind of have to understand the challenges that our clients are facing. So I want to take a minute. I've thrown a lot of acronyms and facts and figures at you so far, but I want to try to make this real for you for a minute. So I want you to imagine that Georgia and Florida, the states, have been at war for years. And if you're a football fan, this is not that big of a stretch for you. So Georgia and Florida have been at war for years, and we'll say most of the fighting has been down at the border in Jacksonville, so you've really never been concerned about it. It's been going on as long as you can remember, and it's never affected you. And then you wake up one morning, you've lost power, you've lost internet, gas prices are, of course, through the roof, and there's a thick cloud of smoke outside, and you realize that the fighting has moved into your territory, and it's time to go. And so you have to pack quickly. You've got maybe 30 minutes to an hour to throw all of your stuff in a bag. And what do you take with you? You're looking around, and do you take, those valuable family heirlooms that you'll never see again if you don't take them now? Or do you pack practically and bring clothing and food? You throw a bag together and you grab your kids and you start walking. Keep in mind, driving is not an option because there are so many people fleeing at once that the streets are congested and it's just impossible to drive. And you walk all the way up to South Carolina, and there are people patrolling up and down the border because they've taken too many Georgians and they can't take you anymore. And they turn you around. So you walk up to North Carolina, and they do take you. They take you in, they get you registered, they get you set up with a tent and tell you where the line is for rations. And you keep hoping that you'll be able to return to Hartwell because for a lot of you, maybe you've grown up here, and this is where you've built a life for yourself. Why would you want to leave your home? And so one day, you're watching the news, and you see reports, and Hartwell has been absolutely flattened, decimated. There's nothing to go back to. And you realize that that's only going to start spreading throughout the rest of the country. So you realize that it's time to go. You register with the UNHCR for refugee status. You are granted refugee status. And now you wait for about 17 years in that camp and with your 2 kids. And finally, one day, you are one of the lucky few whose name has been drawn out of the hat, and you get to go and be resettled elsewhere. Now, one of your kids at this point has already passed that 21 years of age mark, and so they no longer qualify to go with you. It's just you and your younger child. And you make it through all of the background checks and the interviews where you have to relive all of these experiences of fleeing your home in front of strangers. And they say, okay, and they get you connected to a plane ticket. They put you on a plane, and you land in China. And you get off the plane in China, and of course, you're jet-lagged and disoriented. You've been traveling for over 24 hours straight. And there's a group of people there to greet you, and they're smiling, and they're speaking rapid-fire Chinese at you. And how do you respond to that? They start shuffling you towards their car, and you hop in because what other choice do you have? They drop you off at an apartment complex. You have no idea if it's safe or not. You just hope and pray that you're in a good place. And they hand you food that you'd hardly recognize as food. And they hand you 160 Chinese yuan. You have no idea if that's $5 or 500. But you sign for it because, again, what else do you do at that point? And they tell you to get a good night's rest and they'll be back tomorrow. And you wake up the next morning, and of course your first thought is you want to call your son who's back over in North Carolina. but you quickly realize you're not exactly tapped into Chinese cell service and you don't have an international plan. How are you going to get in touch with him? You look at the money in your hand and you realize that you need more food, but you have no idea how much money you have, how much that's going to buy. You wouldn't know where to buy it even if you knew how much money you had, and even if you knew where to buy it, you have no idea how to communicate and buy anything because, again, you don't speak Chinese. And then you start thinking longer term, you got to get a job because you need more money, and you've got to support this kid. But how are you going to get a job if you don't speak Chinese? How are you going to get to a job? You certainly don't have a Chinese driver's license, and that public transit system does not look familiar to you. Do you trust the school systems to take in your kid and educate them and keep them safe? Do you trust the doctors to do checkups and give you medicine? And what about your community in the long run? You know, you've grown up in the church. This is your family. This is your support system, and you're not seeing any churches around the corner. And really, you realize that you have no choice at this point but to sit and wait and pray that that person who said they're coming back will, and that they come with more food, more money, maybe a few action plan steps, and good intentions. I hope you see where I'm going with this. If we pull ourselves out of this little story, then that is where we would come in. And that's a lot of the challenges that our clients are facing. This is a very hypothetical scenario for most of us. It's something I personally can't imagine, but this is the reality for all of my clients. These are the barriers that we have to try and help them tackle. So we have a lot of programs in place to help them address all of these things. We have a few core programs. The first is our reception and placement program. That is, all of clients are funneled through those, and that's the first 90 days. So it's pretty intensive services designed for their basic survival. So they get them connected to government benefits. That way they have access to food and health care. They drive them to all of their doctor's appointments, get them connected to English language classes and cultural orientation, provide money for food and housing. And they also provide some financial assistance. We get a per capita amount per person. And then at the end of those 90 days, assuming they don't go into the third one on their matching grants, they go into either our RAP or TANF programs, which for our purposes will just qualify as one program. And those are our long-term programs that serve clients up to 5 years, but they do not offer financial assistance. So at this point, our clients are kind of on their own in terms of paying for their expenses. They do offer employment services, getting people connected to jobs, and then also some case management. So they help them with the longer term things like applying for driver's licenses, green cards, trying to bring their families over. Then there is matching grants, which has 3 stars besides it because that's my program. I'm in charge. And so obviously you're going to hear more about matching grant in just a minute. And then we have some of our specialized programs, including intensive case management. That is for people who have really specialized needs. We have a lot of medical needs, like someone with cerebral palsy. We have someone with Down syndrome, and they're going to have like lots of doctor's appointments and things. That's also for pregnant mothers and single mothers, that sort of thing, anyone who's going to require extra care. We also have services to older refugees in our school impact program, which are fairly self-explanatory. So matching grant, my title on my business cards is employment specialist. So as you can probably guess, I do help people find jobs, but there's a lot more to the program than just finding jobs because our goal is early self-sufficiency. So this program lasts 8 months, and by the end of the 8 months, we try to make sure that our clients are self-sufficient, meaning that they can cover all of their expenses with the income that they're earning from their jobs. We do offer financial assistance during this period. We pay for their rent and utilities and offer cash stipends on a monthly basis for as long as they need it or until they reach the end of the 8 months, at which point we have to cut their funding based on federal guidelines. So there are 3 major components to my job. The first is employment. So as far as my day-to-day, I spend a lot of time going to job fairs. I help clients fill out job applications. I help them with the new hire paperwork and communicate with their employers after they've been hired because there do tend to be a lot of challenges that I help them navigate, arranging transportation, that sort of thing. There's also budgeting, the financial component of helping them go through and understand their budget, their expenses, and figuring out how to pay their bills. And then the case management component, which is my favorite part. It makes the job very exciting and very, very, very exhausting. because case management is pretty much any immediate needs of my clients. So that is anywhere from helping them open a bank account to setting my alarm for 4:30 in the morning to drive my client to her scheduled inducement. So it's fun work. It's exhausting. Every day when I get into work, I have a calendar of all the things that I want to do that day, and I might as well just toss it out the window because the day never goes as planned. So, love the case management component. And the last thing I want to cover about matching grant, because this is the thing that's bolded and emphasized in all of our paperwork, is that our clients are required to accept the first appropriate job that is offered to them, including entry-level employment and jobs that are unrelated to their previous career field. And this sounds kind of harsh, and in a way it is. A lot of my clients were highly trained professionals. We have doctors, pilots, accountants, engineers, people who are very well trained in their fields. And now, it's going to take a really long time to get them back into those fields, either due to limited English or lack of certification. And so our goal is to help them understand that even though this is your passion, this was your career, you have to be able to feed yourself and your family, and so we need to get you plugged into jobs as soon as possible. So it's really hard sometimes to tell someone who may have been in the medical field that you have to start in manufacturing or fast food. I had one client who was a pilot who got in trouble. I had to issue a written warning because he turned down a job because he didn't want to work at the Chick-fil-A. And that was a really uncomfortable conversation because I see where he's coming from, but I also know that in the long run, it's best for our clients if they get employed as soon as possible. But that is a very important part of our agreement that we go over and over and over with clients. So just to give you an idea of the people that I'm serving, I currently have 40 cases, which is 111 people. I could serve up to 115 in my program, and we actually may be getting more slots, which mean I could serve anywhere from 150 to 200. So a few people. They come from all over the world. Most of my clients right now are from Afghanistan due to this influx, but I also have served clients from Burundi, Eritrea, Iran, Honduras, and Syria. So if you assume that I was getting to use my Spanish a lot, I am not. I usually am communicating through a Dari interpreter because I've picked up about 4 or 5 Dari words and don't exactly consider myself fluent. So the languages that my clients speak are Amharic, Arabic, Dari, Farsi, Kirundi, Pashto, Spanish, Swahili, and Tigrinya. And that does, in fact, sound like a foreign language in and of itself, listing out those languages. I actually, my first day on the job, was talking with my boss, and he mentioned Dari, and I assumed that was a person, and I was very wrong. So don't feel bad if you didn't recognize half those languages. I didn't either. All right, I also want to give you kind of a quick visualization of that. These are the countries that I currently have clients in. We also have a pretty high population from Burma, which is in Southeast Asia. I just haven't had any in my program yet, so I couldn't technically put it on there, but we will have some. And then these are the various languages that my clients speak. I think those are the correct translations, but. So, of course, the most interesting part is going to be the stories about my clients, and so I want to give you all the interesting ones, so I'm going to start you off with a good one. And I can't give names or pictures of my clients, unfortunately, so we're going to call him Abdul because that's basically like saying I have a client named John Smith. So my client, Abdul, my parents are already laughing over this. This guy is one of the single most exhausting human beings I've ever met in my life. You know those people when you talk to him for 5 minutes and you feel like you need a nap afterwards? That is this man. And so I got a call from a coworker of mine one morning, and she said, "Hey, Gabby, I got a call from Abdul. There seems to be an issue. I don't really know what's going on. You may want to check into it." I was like, "Okay." So I give him a call. I said, "Hey, Abdul, good morning." He said, "Good morning, Gabby. There's a problem in my kitchen." I was like, all right. Do you need my help?" He said, yes, you come to my house. I said, "Okay." And so I drive to his house. It was about 20 minutes, and I arrived, and said problem in his kitchen. This man, I still have no idea what happens. He and his brother and the other guy living with them, they have no idea what happened, but he somehow managed to burn from the top of his oven all the way up to his ceiling. There was charred stuff all over the floor. There was smoke damage in the kitchen and the living room. And That burner with the tea kettle on it, that was glowing red when I got there because he had melted the oven dials and couldn't turn it off. So I had to go and find the breaker switch for the apartment and turn electricity off for the entire thing and just shut it down, start over. I asked him afterwards, I said, Abdul, do you know what number you're supposed to call in case of emergency? He said, yeah, 911. I was like, well, then why did you call me? And he's like, oh, no, it was fine. I was like, it clearly was not. So I asked him, I was like, okay, well, what about your fire extinguisher? He said, I don't have one. And I'm like, oh, no, because that's our job to make sure that our clients have a fire extinguisher. And I opened the first cabinet, and of course, it's right there. I'm like, dude, it was right here. And I was like, okay, so for future reference, it's right here. Do you know how to use it? He's like, yeah, and he starts messing with it. I'm like, well, don't use it now. Like, the damage is done. The fire's out. So I'm like, okay, you didn't use a fire extinguisher. How did you put this fire out? And he starts miming, beating at it with rags. And I see a pile of burnt towels and T-shirts and things that he has used to put out the fire. I'm like, bless. So, yeah, I'm imagining him, actively beating out the flames while he's on the phone with me saying, Gabby, there's a problem in my kitchen. So this was easily one of my most interesting days on the job. We walked outside afterwards, and he kind of just shrugged his shoulders and said, it's okay. In Afghanistan, house made of wood, house burned all the way down. Here, it's not that bad. Like, I appreciate the perspective, but can we maybe not try to burn our kitchens down in the future? So we're still dealing with this problem. It's their apartment still not ready. It's a mess. Oh, gosh. Now, the reason I tell you this story, first of all, it's really funny. But second of all is because all of those statistics that I just gave you, they're scary, they're overwhelming numbers, and it's easy to forget that they're attached to people. Because to me now, that 26.4 million includes my favorite Afghan firefighter. It includes this guy who, 24 hours after I met him, texted me 200 individual messages at Friday night at midnight. Just pictures of his camera roll of he and his family, just wanted me to see what he was doing. This is the same guy who, every time I go and visit him at work, forces me to take these weird rose-flavored Afghan drinks that I'm still too terrified to try. Oh, goodness, this guy. But they're attached to people and stories. There's a quote by a woman who I absolutely love. She says, those 70 million people were just numbers to me too, until I learned their names. And I think that's a really powerful statement because it's really, really easy to hear and see about those masses and just kind of lump them all together and forget that there are people attached to those statistics. So, yes, my clients are a bit of a mess, but I enjoy getting to know them and their individual stories. And not all the stories are funny like this one. The same client, Abdul, I sat with him on the couch one day going over a budgeting meeting. And at one point, I heard a loud, pop outside. Pretty sure it was a car backfire. I do live in Columbia, so it could have been a gunshot. But I grew up in the Southeast where I played the gunshots versus fireworks game on 4th of July, so I didn't react. I just kind of sat there. And both he and his brother jump up, and they're like, it's okay. I'm like, I know. And Abdul goes, no, it's okay. He said, in Afghanistan, that means they're bombing your house, but in America, you're safe. And it made me laugh, but at the same time, that was the first time that I really realized kind of the extent of what my clients had gone through. I had another client who I was helping him fill out a job application, and for some reason, the application asked if he liked hunting and fishing. I don't know why. It was a manufacturing job. It has nothing to do with anything, but they asked him if he liked hunting and fishing, and so I kind of jokingly asked him through the interpreter, and he responds, and the interpreter busts out laughing. I'm like, what in the world is so funny? He said, he wants to know if hunting Taliban counts. And then I bust out laughing because that's funny. And if you're wondering if he's being serious, he was joking about putting that on his application. He was absolutely not joking about hunting down Taliban. He was military over there. I have another client who sat for 2 hours and described to me the 24-hour collapse of Kabul as his city fell around him. And we got to the end, and I was just kind of staring at him blankly because I certainly can't relate to that. I don't have much to contribute to that conversation. And I kind of apologized for that, and he said, "Oh, I gave you the tame version. You're not ready for the whole version." Okay. I have another guy who I really could dedicate a full 2 hours just to this man. He's already been contacted about possibly being a part of a documentary. And he, let's just say he was important enough in Afghan politics that his death would have been considered an assassination. And within that last 24 hours, he was captured alive by the Taliban. And he was led into a room where there were about 100 dead bodies and Taliban rushing at him. And he assumed that he was gone for, and he still has no idea how he got out of there alive. Someone just grabbed him and ran. My clients have been through hell. And unfortunately, even though they're safe from those people who are actively hunting them down here, they're at a disadvantage with limited English and limited understanding of our culture, and they still have to do life. I have a client who, at 8 months pregnant, was cleaning hotel rooms because her husband was in Afghanistan. She has a 17-year-old sister and a baby on the way, and even though she complained about she was sore and tired and nauseous and dizzy, what other choice did she have? Her funding was running out, and she had to work to support that baby. My client, Abdul, who, set his house on fire, this guy has said that his children will get on the phone with him and just cry and ask when their dad is coming home. And what does he say to them, and what do I say to him? Because I certainly can't speed the process along of getting his children here. I have another client who is trying to support his wife and his 5 children on $10 an hour. And he's working currently for an employer who is taking advantage of the fact that he doesn't understand U.S. finances and the U.S. tax system, but he speaks Arabic, and so he feels comfortable there and wants to stay. The worst story by far, which I got an update this afternoon, it's not going well, is a woman who came here and a couple months after she arrived gave birth. The baby's been in the NICU since she was born. She's had breathing issues. And they thought they were going to have to put some sort of breathing apparatus in. That way, over the next couple years, her tubes could kind of harden around that and she would be able to breathe normally. And 2 or 3 weeks ago, we found out that, unfortunately, it's a little more serious than that. She actually has a genetic brain disorder called lissencephaly, and she won't age past 5 months and probably won't live past 2 years. And the mom had to hear this through an interpreter over video chat with the doctor. Those are the kinds of things that would be unbelievably difficult for anyone in any situation, but especially considering what these people have gone through. That's really, really tough. And that's the point where we kind of have to toss professionalism aside on our end and just love on them, because what else do you do at that point? Which kind of leads me into my last point of the evening, which is what the Bible has to say about the topic. I have, at some point in my life, laid eyes on every word in the Bible. I didn't understand a lot of it, but unless I'm mistaken, I don't think God ever said anything about what the refugee admission ceiling should be for the United States 2,000 years later. I don't think he touches on that. I don't think he's ever said, which populations we should have come here, what those systems should look like, and what their funding sources should be. He kind of stays silent on those issues. But he does make one thing really clear. So I want to read a couple verses of scripture to you. The first is from Leviticus. When a foreigner resides among you in your land, do not mistreat them. The foreigner residing among you must be treated as your native born. Love them as yourself, for you were foreigners in Egypt. I am the Lord your God. And then he repeats himself in Deuteronomy and says, he defends the cause of the fatherless and the widow, and loves the foreigner residing among you, giving them food and clothing. And you are to love those who are foreigners, for you yourselves were foreigners in Egypt. Foreigners have always been one of the world's most vulnerable populations. The Bible lists them right up there with widows and orphans. And God has always been the chief defender of those most vulnerable. And he calls us to do the same. That looks different for different people, and it looks different in different regions of the world, but the call is still the same. To love the foreigner, that includes the immigrant, the asylee, the SIV case, the TPS, and the refugee as yourselves. And when we do that, And when we do it well, I promise you, people take notice. I had a client last week who told me he kind of opened the door to a conversation on religion. And he doesn't really know what to think about God. He first told me that he didn't believe in him, and then he told me that he was mad at him for everything that had happened in Afghanistan, and frankly, I can't blame him. But he's kind of lost and confused, but he's curious about who this Jesus guy is and what he has to offer. He's skeptical. He has a lot of questions, and I think he's going into it with a very heavy sense of skepticism, but he's curious, he's open, he's asking questions. And what an opportunity right there for us to show the love and the mercy and the peace and rest that Christ offers that these people desperately need. So, I would be a very poor nonprofit representative if I didn't end by telling you guys how you can help these people. So, the first is obviously financial. If you're able to do so, there are a couple ways to donate. You can donate online at our website or donate by check. I have more details about how to do that on the papers on your table. If you donate by check, you would need to specify LSC New Americans because LSC has a couple other programs. If you want it to go to our office, you would also have to specify Columbia, although I assure you there are just as many needs in our other offices in North and South Carolina. If you want it to go to my program, you can also specify matching grant, or you can be as specific as you want. It can go to a client's rent or their legal fees or anything under the sun that you want to cover. We have some tangible needs as well. This is kind of a big ask, but our clients are in desperate need of cars. It takes a huge burden off of our shoulders when they can get themselves to doctor's appointments and get themselves to jobs. And so if you or anyone else that you know is looking to get rid of one or sell one cheaply, I am all over it. We also need laptops for our clients. That really helps us get them connected to English language resources and develop computer skills that they need for jobs. Visa and Walmart gift cards are always appreciated, and I'm going to make that real easy for y'all. You can just give them right to my mom, and she can pass them on. We also need a lot of legal help. If you know of any lawyers in any state, I know we have a lawyer, at least one in the room, but anyone who might be willing to do pro bono or discounted work for our clients, we would be eternally grateful for that because there's nothing our clients want more right now than to be reunited with their families, and that takes a lot of good legal help to make that happen. So we also have an office in Greenville. If anyone has the time and is interested in volunteering, I'd love to connect you with them and see the ways that you can help. And then, of course, we are always in need of prayer, and if you're someone who likes to get really specific with your prayer, specifically family reunification, employment opportunities, and medical miracles, because we could use a few of those right now. So I also did not include in this list, but just peace for our world in general. I love my job. I love what I'm doing, but I would not be mad if I lost my job because all the resettlement agencies shut down because there's no more refugees in the world. So that pretty much concludes my program, and I will leave it open to questions for a few minutes if y'all have any.
Gabby, tell them what you told me about how when they were coming from Afghanistan and they were in the airport, what happened to so many of those persons that were trying to make their way onto planes.
Yeah, no, that was absolute chaos. And again, like I said, the U.S. was guarding some doors, but the Taliban still had a lot of control over the airport. And so basically when they were coming in, the Taliban were basically just taking things from them. They had packed up all their belongings. A lot of them had money on them, and they just kind of stripped them of that. And they were okay. The Taliban had said, okay, you can go to the planes, but you can't take anything with you. So I have one guy who arrived with literally just his backpack and a poster that he had brought with him, and that was all he had. So that's very common for our clients. Yeah.
Well, the Taliban didn't want the poster.
They didn't care about that.
But they took diplomas, they took licenses, anything in English they took.
Yeah, they were, the client who was telling me about his last 24 hours in Kabul, he said that he burned a lot of his documents, including a master's degree in engineering from Duke University, on a barbecue grill because the Taliban were going door to door, and if they found anything written in the language of the enemy, they would shoot you right there on the spot.
I noticed too that by the clarification of refugee, that Jesus himself was a refugee, that he fled Israel and went into Egypt, and we must remember that. And so the man that we follow was a refugee, and he went home only after it was safe. Well, I think we are so grateful for Gab. We're so proud of her, number one. And you look awesome, and we're just so proud of you. And thank you for opening our eyes tonight. Doesn't she look so professional? Oh, my goodness. She looks so professional there, so we're very proud of you. Thank y'all for being with us tonight. If you have any questions or anything, Marcy will answer all of those, Marcy and Joe. And so when you go to see Joe, just ask him all those questions, and that'll work. Have a good evening. We've got a meeting about 7 o'clock, and so God bless you, and have a great evening. Thank you for being with us tonight, and thank you, Gab, so much.